thought we understood hybrid power. Prius people's idea of a combustion engine occasionally backed up by electrical assistance. General Motors, though, saw the concept rather differently. Shouldn't the battery be the main power source, with an engine there only to recharge it and extend the range when necessary? That'd create an all-electric car you wouldn't have to keep recharging, an all-electric car almost anyone could consider owning. It'd be a game changer. Well, welcome to that vision made in metal, GM's Chevrolet Volt. Here's the future, and you can drive it now.
The history of the electric vehicle is a long and varied one, dating back in fact even further than that of the conventional combustion engine, and some say even beyond that of the motor car itself. People tend to forget that inventors were playing around with electrically powered carriages as long ago as the 1830s, and by the turn of the century, battery power had taken off to such an extent that in the US, electric cars were actually outselling petrol ones. Sadly, at that point, the engineers ran out of ideas, lacking the know-how to take alkaline battery technology to the next step. As gasoline-fired automobiles began rolling out of American factories, the electric car concept ground to a halt, waiting for a design approach that would finally make it practical for everyday use. An approach that's taken until now to arrive, with models like this one, Chevrolet's Volt. This isn't a pure electric car, and that's exactly why it properly fulfills the original battery-powered brief for day-in, day-out family practicality. Completely all-electric cars can't, given their limited operating range of no more than around 100 miles. Better battery technology is years away and will be very expensive when it arrives. Hence the need for an electric car that you don't really have to charge, a vehicle like this one. The reason why is that it has a little 1.4 litre petrol engine that acts as a generator and charges the batteries once you exhaust the driving range they offer. The batteries then power an electric motor, and the motor powers the wheels. There's still the all-electric style option of charging the batteries straight from a plug, but crucially, you don't have to if you're out and about and there's no chance to do that. Finally then, an all-electric vehicle anyone could own. A design so clever that it's fashioned for itself an all-new, all-electric market segment for e-revs or extended range electric vehicles. This Chevy is essentially the same as Vauxhall's Ampera, and these two cars were the first e-revs to hit the UK market. They won't be the last. Let's put this one to the test. Pure electric vehicles are all very worthy, but their restricted operating range means you couldn't really consider one as anything other than a second vehicle. Let me give you an example as to why. For the same price as this Chevrolet Volt, I could have bought myself an all-electric Nissan Leaf. But what would happen then if, with the Nissan on my driveway, my 4-year-old niece, say, 17 miles away, wants to invite me to her birthday party and lives somewhere that means parking on the street where charging is impossible? I wouldn't be able to go. Would she understand why? In this car, there's no range anxiety of that kind. In fact, anxiety is notably absent from every part of this car's driving experience, so relaxed and laid back is its driving demeanour. Or at least it is once you've figured out how everything works. The layout of the cabin is, after all, initially a little daunting. Knobs and buttons largely being replaced by touch-sensitive panels and 2 colour LCD screens. Now, one of these, a touch-sensitive screen, is pretty much where you'd expect to find it, at the top of the centre console, marshalling climate control, navigation and infotainment functions, as well as, to suit this Volt's electric remit, power use and charging functions. The second, though, is less familiar, described by Chevrolet as a driver information centre, and there to completely replace the dials that you'd otherwise expect to find in front of you. Now, depending on your choice between two configurations, enhanced or simple, this can display either a very sketchy or a very comprehensive review of everything from speed to driving range, tyre pressure to oil life, battery charge to trip information. Having got your head around this, you begin to adjust to this Volt's 21st century way of doing things. There's the expected electric silence on startup, and as with all electric cars, an automatic gearbox. This one featuring an unfamiliar L, or low designation, in which setting the car will more quickly recoup energy to recharge this 16 kilowatt battery pack whenever you lift off the throttle. Yes, the battery pack. It's located rather close by, in a T-shaped compartment that sits in this central spine that bisects the interior, then turns left and right across the rear seat base. Space, then, for an awful lot of battery power, and an awful lot of weight. Hence the central placement that aims to compensate for the extra bulk by providing for a centre of gravity that's about 40 millimetres lower than you get in a typical family hatchback, which ought to provide for sharper handling. It doesn't. This isn't an especially engaging car to drive. There's neither the steering feel, the ride quality, or the ultimate traction for that. But it has many other attributes that are arguably more important in this type of car. For a start, this, as already suggested, is one of the most relaxing cars in the world to drive at any price. Partly, of course, because of its incredible refinement. So quiet is it, in fact, that in town you might feel the need to activate the pedestrian alert warning system that you use this button at the end of the turnstile to switch on. It warns people of your approach with a chirping sound. Silence, though, you might expect of an all-electric car. What's more a shock is just how quick this one feels. Rest to 30 takes just 3.1 seconds, even if things do tail off rather after that. Even at speed, though, this Volt really does feel quite fast, more like an ordinary V6 executive saloon, thanks to a potent 370 newton meters of torque. Certainly more rapid than you'd expect, given that the electric motor has just 150 PS, with which to propel 1.7 tons of Volt. It runs out of puff quite early, mind. Top speed is limited to just 99 miles an hour, but on the way, in-gear acceleration is quite up to the standard of a comparable conventional executive saloon, 50 to 70 miles an hour, for example, taking little more than 6 seconds. Drive enthusiastically like this, and of course the relatively meagre electric-only driving range won't last very long. From a fully charged start, Chevrolet quotes between 25 and 50 miles, depending on terrain, technique and temperature. Now, beyond that, the real cleverness starts with an 86 PS 1.4 litre petrol engine seamlessly fired into life at about 20 miles an hour when the battery charge depletes as low as 22%. Not, I should stress, to power the wheels. That only happens if you really are stamping on the gas in engine-only mode. No, the petrol engine's primarily there to power a 72 PS generator that recharges the electric drive unit as you go. So all electric progress continues. It's just that you'll be able to go a lot further on it. Up to 310 miles, in fact, according to Chevrolet, before you need to recharge or refuel. That figure's an estimate, of course, with your exact total range dependent to a great extent on your selection between 4 different driving modes, selectable via this Drive Mode button on the centre console. Normal is the default option, but you can also switch to Sport, a setting that gives you a sharper throttle response thanks to cleverness that increases the flow of electrons from the battery by 20%. The feeling that you get is a bit like a turbo cutting in. The other 2 driving modes will be rarely used. Hold charge is a potentially useful function that you might want to activate if you're starting a long trip that'll end in a city centre.
Now, pressing it or selecting it is a bit like putting a pause on the battery charge, preserving it until the urban end to your trip, and in the meantime immediately activating the range extender petrol engine generator. That leaves mountain mode, which you're supposed to select 10 or 15 minutes ahead of time before attempting a particularly steep climb to ensure that there'll be enough battery energy to complete it. But unless you live on a particularly high alp, that's a feature that will be completely redundant in ordinary motoring. And ordinary motoring is exactly what this Volt has been designed to deliver, for those at least with off-street parking who can plug it in each night.
Or during the day. Electric vehicle charging points like this one are springing up in town centres all over the UK, and there are many more in Europe. Now, to use one, you're going to need to get yourself a council charge card like this for a relatively affordable fee that should also cover the electricity you'll be using. Now, once you have your card, you simply find yourself a charging point, then retrieve the 6-metre long charging cable from the boot, then simply plug into the charging point with the ordinary 3-point plug. Then put the socket into the charging point in the wing of the car. When you return from your shopping or your business meeting, simply reverse the process. But more often, of course, you're going to be charging from home. Back here, the same kind of 230 volt 13 amp socket will be quite sufficient, recharging the battery in just under 6 hours. This can work via a timer program that can be set to take advantage of cheap off-rate electricity. Most Volt owners, though, will want to specify the optional 16 amp home charging station, which can charge the car from empty in under 4 hours. You might want to get your home electrics checked out first before fitting that, though. Now, a lot of clever technology has been built in to this whole system. For a start, you might wonder what might happen if you leave your Chevy Volt for a few weeks to go on holiday. No problem, it'll start first time. You might also wonder about the danger of starting off while all connected up. That's no issue either. The engine won't start until you've disconnected all the wire. Then there's the issue of what happens to the petrol in the tank if you go for weeks or months driving on electric plug-in power only. Well, that's not a problem. The fuel is periodically cycled through the engine to keep it fresh. This Chevy even deals you a get-out-of-jail-free card should you drain the petrol tank dry. The 22% of battery charge that always stays in reserve equates to 2 to 3 miles of electric-only range that should glide you to the nearest petrol station or charging point if all else fails. This Volt was the first ever joint winner of the European Car of the Year award in 2012, sharing the accolade with its stablemate, the Vauxhall, or on the continent, the Opel Ampera. Now, sharing was necessary because the judges couldn't differentiate between the two models in any meaningful way. What differences there are can mainly be found in the styling. This Chevy slightly less distinctive than its stablemate, but still smart and shapely, wearing its front grille bow tie badge with pride. Particularly eye-catching is the high deck at the rear, incorporating a flat spoiler, intended to emphasise a wedgie profile enhanced by a black shoulder line. It's a sleek one too, with a drag coefficient the stylists reckon is slippery enough to add up to 8 miles to this car's battery-only driving range, and up to 50 miles to its total extended range. Underneath it all lies the same Delta platform that undergirds Chevrolet's similarly sized Cruze model, as well as Vauxhall's Astra. And inside? Well, Chevrolet wants you to think that this Volt is the future, even before you start driving it. Hence this white dashboard finish that, along with the white leather seat facings, is supposed to offer up something of an iPod-ish feel that's a lot more in your face than the cabin ambience of an Ampera. How practical this would all be in day-to-day family use is another question, of course. In many ways, operating this model is a lot more like using a PC than it is driving a car, with most of the main functions controlled by these two large colour screens, there to replace the buttons, the switchgear, and behind the wheel the instrumentation you'd otherwise have to have. You do a double take at it all the first time you get behind the wheel, but you quickly adjust. Particularly clever, I think, is this 7-inch screen on top of the centre console. When activated by this efficiency leaf symbol button, it switches from climate control and infotainment functions to show you power flow, energy information and charging displays. The power flow display shows real-time energy flow between the battery, the electric drive unit, the engine and the wheels. In energy info, you've got 3 options. Energy usage shows information on all activities since the battery was last charged. So you've got how far the car has gone on battery power and in extended range mode, the total amount of fuel that's been used, the average fuel economy, and a lifetime fuel economy figure, which gives a cumulative total over the life of the car. Energy efficiency shows you how efficiently the vehicle was driven in its last charging cycle, and efficiency tips give you helpful pointers for driving more economically and increasing your operating range. Things like using the seat heaters instead of the heating and ventilation system for warming up the cabin in cold weather, for example. Although this is a fairly big car, at 4.5 metres end-to-end, it's about 140 millimetres longer than a Ford Focus. One major disappointment for me as a family man is that it's a strict 4-seater. This high dividing berth between the rear seats, incorporating a couple of cup holders, but really there to house the bulky 198 kilogram battery pack. Still, the seats that you do get, supportive bucket affairs, are pretty comfortable, though headroom is at a bit of a premium, much more so than in Chevrolet's more conventional Cruze model. As a result, overall, you get more space if you were an eco-minded motorist by opting for something like a Toyota Prius. But I wouldn't say that there's much difference to the amount of rear cabin room you get here compared to, say, a conventional compact executive saloon like a BMW 3 Series or an Audi A4. Battery storage is a further limiting factor when it comes to boot space. It's shallower than most, but having said that, 300 litres with all the seats in place is a reasonable showing, and you get a wide opening tailgate. It's a pity that you don't have a proper parcel shelf, but unlike some electric cars, you can at least push forwards the rear seats to increase your total luggage capacity. Now, there's an underfloor storage compartment that's normally used to house the battery charging cable, but if you leave that at home, you will have a few more litres to keep valuables away from prying eyes. Storage for smaller items includes door pockets big enough to hold a 1.5 litre drinks bottle in a recess designed to be big enough for compact umbrella stowage. If at first glance you're tempted to double take at the thought of paying around £30,000 for a family car with a Chevrolet badge, then you really need to adjust your thinking. Millions upon millions of dollars have been poured into the technology behind this design, to the point where it's been estimated that it costs General Motors around £50,000 to build each car. Now, GM refuses to confirm either this or reliable estimates, reckoning that the lithium-ion battery pack alone for each Volt costs the company around £6,000 for every model rolling from their Detroit production lines. What they can't deny is that this car loses them money. Or at least it does at present. GM plans to make its investment back further down the line. In other words, it's playing the long game, in the same way that on a much smaller scale, early adopting buyers of this car will be. Buy one, after all, and you'll be up against plenty of barroom cynics who will suggest that a good diesel or hybrid model would have satisfied your eco cravings for a lot less. And anyway, the better informed amongst them might suggest, if you really did want an extended range electric vehicle, why didn't you buy a Vauxhall Ampera? Well, at least that one's easy to answer. The cost of this Volt is around £30,000 once you've deducted the generous £5,000 government PICG plug-in car grant from the initially off-putting asking price. Now that's about the same as you pay for an entry-level spec Vauxhall Ampera Earth. But if you went for the Vauxhall, you'd have to do without many of the features that you'd expect on a car of this price. Things like leather trim for the seats and the steering wheel, seat heaters, a rear view parking camera and rear parking sensors. Now, to get these things on the Vauxhall, you'd need to stretch to the mid-level positive model. This Volt includes them all in one complete spec. That runs to 17-inch alloy wheels, auto headlamps, air conditioning, Bluetooth compatibility for your phone and cruise control. In fact, apart from the extra cost metallic paint, there's only one real major additional spend item that you're going to want to consider: the £1,750 audio and navigation option pack. And now that gives you a 30GB 7-speaker DVD-ROM Bose audio system and satellite navigation. I'd also want to have an additional charging cable connected up in the garage at home, so I didn't have to keep dragging out and unwinding the one stored in the boot. So, how does an outlay of around £30,000 stack up against what else an eco-conscious family buyer might be looking at for this kind of money? Well, it's worth bearing in mind that a decently specified diesel-powered Ford Focus or Honda Civic could very easily set you back around £25,000, while a BMW 320d SE Automatic would cost you pretty much exactly the same as this Chevrolet and be vastly more expensive to run. But of course, you won't be comparing this Volt to a 3 Series any more than you'll be comparing it against a Focus. This Chevy will be bought or considered primarily by eco-minded early adopters, people who'll already probably be looking at comparably sized all-electric cars like Nissan's Leaf or the Renault Fluence ZE. Both are cheaper, but both also lack the clever range-extending technology that, of course, is central to this Volt's appeal. That only leaves hybrids. An ordinary equivalently specified Toyota Prius would save you about £6,000, but of course it'd be constantly using its petrol engine and draining its tank. Only a Prius plug-in, which costs almost as much as this Volt, can offer any kind of electric-only driving range, and then only about 12 miles. If you do decide on the Chevrolet, then you'll also want to know that some of the more conventional boxes have been ticked, like safety. Rest easy. For a start, the battery pack has been thoroughly tested for water tightness and safety in emergencies. Plus, there's stability control, ABS with electronic brake force distribution and brake assist for emergency stops, no fewer than 8 airbags, ISOFIX child seat fastenings and anti-whiplash head restraints, all contributing to a full 5-star Euro NCAP safety showing. Everything, it seems, has been thoroughly thought through. Now, once you've justified the asking price of one of these and started using it, the savings very rapidly start to stack up. Savings like the free road tax afforded by its 27 grams per kilometre of CO2 figure. the fact that you'll only pay 5% of the value of the car in company car tax, something that might sway a few reps from their Audis and BMWs. The fact that you get free entry into London congestion charging zones. Or the fact that Chevrolet reckons that the cost of charging this Volt in between 4 to 6 hours from empty will cost you no more than around £1. Less, in fact, if, like a neighbour of mine who owns one of these, you actually have solar power at home. Or if, as is very likely, you can set the charging process to operate on inexpensive off-peak rates. That kind of running cost figure is well worth thinking about. No more than £1 for up to 40 miles of usage. Suddenly, the quoted and rather bizarre-looking European cycle fuel economy figure of 235.4 miles to the gallon looks like a possibility. And therein lies the paradox with this car. Use it as was intended by plugging in each night, and you'll reduce your day-to-day running costs to almost nothing. But at the same time, you'll be lugging around a largely extraneous petrol engine with you. Use that petrol engine and of course the bills tot up a bit faster, as in fact you might expect, given that a little 1.4 litre unit is having to drag around a car with a curb weight of 1,732 kilograms. That incidentally makes it 312 kilograms heavier than a Toyota Prius and 428 kilograms heavier than Chevrolet's similarly sized family Cruze model. In my use with this car over the last few days, mixed city driving, open roads and so on, I've been averaging about 50 miles to the gallon, maybe sometimes up to 55, which is not far off what you get from a modern diesel. Doubtless I could have improved on that if I'd paid more attention to the driving efficiency display. Now you'll find this next to the speed readout on the screen behind the wheel. It's based around a little revolving ball that moves up or down or changes colour depending on speed, acceleration or braking. Keeping the ball in the centre of the display denotes optimum power usage. Now get the knack of that and you'll quickly see the results on the energy efficiency and energy usage displays that you'll find on this centre console screen. That's also the place for a series of efficiency tips that help you improve economy and driving range. Even the optional Bose audio setup is energy efficient, using around 50% of the power of conventional systems. Having said all that, if you're totally focused on the pounds, shillings and pence of this car, then you might miss the bigger picture. It's very different, in its own way very enjoyable, and if the right fit for your lifestyle, an utterly convincing thing. And a good long-term proposition? Perhaps. Chevrolet buyers only get a 3-year 60,000 mile warranty that seems a little short compared to the Vauxhall Ampera's lifetime 100,000 mile warranty. But the two cars do share the same battery warranty, 8 years or 100,000 miles. Now, battery life is actually something that Chevrolet is pretty confident about, thanks to the way that the drive system's electronic control module ensures that never more than around 65% of the battery charge is ever used. GM's engineers reckon that the battery pack should last for at least 150,000 miles. In development, they've allowed for at least 6,000 full charge or discharge cycles, events that will eventually reduce the battery's charge capacity to 70 or 80% of what it was when new. And when the battery does finally reach the end of its life, well, it's going to be used in a program for storing energy developed by wind farms. Eco-friendly to the end, you see. Servicing and maintenance requirements are similar to those of any conventional Chevrolet, so you'll need an intermediate garage visit every year or 20,000 miles and a full service every 2 years or 40,000 miles. But overall, servicing and maintenance costs will be 15 to 20% lower than they would be for a conventional combustion engine vehicle, thanks to the fact that the electric drive system is almost maintenance free and the fact that the range extender engine will only require minimal servicing. Before this Volt, US brand models designed and built in America were almost all heavy, thirsty and planet polluting. What a turnaround. Along with its Vauxhall Ampera sister car, this Chevrolet is the most significant new model to hit the market since Toyota's Prius revolutionised eco-friendly motoring back just after the turn of this century. Now that car was the Green Movement's poster child back then, and this General Motors design deserves the same kind of following amongst today's buyers. Is it the final answer to planet sustainable motoring? No, of course it isn't. And neither are full electric, hybrid, hydrogen fuel cell, CNG gas or diesel powered vehicles. But what it does do is to very effectively bring together all of the things that green-fingered motorists tend to like. Tiny CO2 figures, huge fuel economy returns and unique packaging at a price not too far beyond the reach of the average family motorist. It's not much more costly than a top Mondeo-sized diesel, no pricier, and much more practical to use than a Nissan Leaf-style full electric model. It's far more frugal than a conventional hybrid and considerably more eco-friendly and cheaper to run than a plug-in hybrid. In other words, if you're considering a car of this kind, this will tick most of your boxes, including that of value for money. This Chevy, after all, is over £2,000 less expensive than a comparably spec'd equivalent Vauxhall Ampera. Ultimately, what matters though is that this is a revolutionary car, one you could quite conceivably own and run without ever visiting a fuel station, safe in the knowledge that venturing further afield was always possible thanks to the clever range-extending technology. True, this may not be the kind of hybrid technology we're familiar with, but it's certainly hybrid technology in a more sensible form. And for families, the first electric car that doesn't have to be a second car. It would certainly be nice if it were more involving to drive and even more affordable, but maybe that's in the future. In the here and now, this is about as clever as it gets if you want a glimpse into all our automotive futures. A family car, but not as we know it.